I think I would like to start with showing how God's providence has been working in my family. This is something I started to research around, I think, 2009, around that time. So I gave this presentation before in Albania, where I went on mission to Albania. And so my wife is from there. And I've discovered a lot more as well about God's providence in my family, how it manifests in my lineage. And my opinion with the providence of restoration was that if it's true, then I should find it in my family. And I think God gave me that desire and the ability to find this, but also He put it in my lineage as well, so that I could find it. So these things come together. And I've also recognized that it appears in other families, like lineage, in your own like tribal providence. But it manifests in different ways as well, because there are many ways God can work through your family. So it doesn't mean that the way it works in my family is the same for yours, but you will definitely find patterns in your life, according to the providence. So I recommend looking for that. It's a great testimony that you can give, for your own understanding, and also when you share it with other people. So I will find Okay, so this is the divine principle and the completion of the purpose of creation in James Powell's family. It's not only chapter in the principle, although it probably could be. I think we could also make our own, version about this. Okay, so this is a quote which I use. Also, when I say true parents said this, it's usually because I read it. But often there's so many things I've read I can't remember the actual source for that so many times. So so also this applies to what I say. So I'm asking you to do your own research. So this is from God's Will in the Ocean. So don't just take my word or anyone's word, find out for yourself. Never believe what others say, but first find out for yourself. You have to train your minds to think and question and research like that. And I really appreciate this quote from your parents that, we're a movement not about blind belief. We're not just believe and you'll be saved. That's not acceptable anymore to humans in general. And that's a major problem that people have with religions, is that they are outdated in that way. They just say, believe. It doesn't make sense, but believe it anyway. But actually we're in an age when we can understand a lot of things. And it's our responsibility to do that. If you're happy to have blind faith and go this way, that's great as well. There's nothing wrong with that. But I encourage people to their maximum capacity to do what they can, to have understanding, because that helps us with witnessing as well, when we were able to explain our faith to other people. You're all familiar with this content, so I'll go through these points quickly. So we have internal nature and external form, and then yang and yin as well. These are dual characteristics. But there's not two sets of dual characteristics. There's two levels, right? There's one set which is internal and external, and then internal nature has dual characteristics of yang and yin, and also external form has yang and yin too. So in the unification thought, it describes these as being on different dimensions. So you've got the first dimensional dual characteristics, of which there's one set, and the second dimensions are two sets. So I applied this in the study of my lineage, and I'll describe how this goes through. Because the subject partner takes the lead in a way, so this manifests in my lineage too. So that's what I'm getting to about the Heavenly Parent works His providence through those closest to Him, which providentially would be like the masculine side. For example, the second son and the father's side are closest to God. So the second son represents, as you know from the principle, is God's position. So I can't go back on this. I haven't used this slide for a long time, so please excuse my... Okay, so there's myself, I'm the second son, and my father is also the second son. So that's the first pattern which I recognized, and kind of was one reason why I wanted to research this more. So the divine principle also demonstrates that God works based on numbers. Actually, if I go back there, I put these little unification logo parts to extra content, so I'll give those here because you'll be able to understand, because not everyone... sometimes I give this to people who don't know about these details. So you can see from the history of the Providence about God's working through numbers. And historians are very familiar with these patterns in history. They don't know the purpose of it, but they're very clear there to be seen. So the number 3 represents growth through the 3 stages of life. And this also applies in the Providence of restoration. So we have formation, growth and completion. And we also have symbol, image and substance, which are also 3 levels of development. So my father's father was the second son as well. So then you could say that as I'm the one who joined, who started following 2 parents, then that would be the completion stage of the Providence, because that's the direction of the Providence. So going back in time, then it would be my father in the growth stage and his father in the formation stage. So here we have a division in my lineage going to the masculine side of my father's father. And according to the divine principle, everything is completed in the 3rd stage. The number 4 represents the 4-position foundation. So there are different types of 4-position foundations. So the first is to be a true person, and then 2 true people become true parents and have a true family, and then true families relating with creation, and they form a true world. So according to the divine principle, the fulfillment of the 4-position foundation is the purpose of creation. The number 7 represents the 7 time periods in the creation process. Okay, so there are there's 6 levels of development, but then there's also the 7th stage, which I call equilibrium, is when the universe became self-sustaining, in effect. It no longer required any investment of creativity for it to continue to develop. So we have the numbers 4 and 7, which is 28. And the number 28, in my opinion, for this content, represents the completion of the purpose of creation, represented by the number 4, the 4-position foundation, completed over a certain time period, represented by number 7. So 4 times 7 is 28. Okay, so how is the number 28 realized in my family? I recognized this pattern before I made the slide, but I'm just doing this in order to show you. So these are the birth years of myself, my father, and his father. So we have 2 28-year time periods between my father and his father, and between my father and myself. And so following the principle, I thought there needs to be a 3rd 28-year period. So, it's 3 stages, So, does anyone know what year that would be?
2000. 2010.
Yeah, it would be. However, in my opinion, because I'm now the completion stage, I'm centering on the Messiah. He's from Korea, and they count the birth year as one on when they're born, right? And so I was born in the third stage. If you count that from the birth year one, then that would be 2009. And I received the blessing with my wife in 2009. So that's what happened at the conclusion of that 28-year period. But also in 2010, my wife and I got legally married. So there's another part there. And as you know from my presentation yesterday, this was the fulfillment of the vision I had when I was 7. So this was something I was looking forward to since I was a 7-year-old. So the blessing is the purpose of creation. And that's what God's working towards in everyone in the world. He's trying to bring everyone to this point. Okay. So that's the end of that part. That's kind of the simple version. There's more to it, which I'll go into next. This part is not as pretty, because it's just raw data. Basically, it's kind of a bit basic. Okay, my father's father was born in 1926, and I've highlighted 26. And my father was born in the 26th of August. So the year of my grandfather's birth is the date of my father's birth, and he was born in August. And so now we're going to the other extreme of my mother's mother, so it's the feminine side. My mother's mother was born 1929, and my mother was born 29 of August. So we have the same pattern repeated in the same generations by going to those two extremes. And my mother was born in August. And so what's the difference between 26 and 29? That's 3. Yeah? My birth year, 3rd of August. My birth date. So that's the harmonization of my parents, also going back to my grandparents. Also my wife, she was born on the 3rd of November, but her parents registered her birth date 20 days late. So on her passport it says that she was born on the 23rd of November, and she was witnessed and joined on the 23rd of November. Okay, so like you can see from my father's side, it goes 28, 28, 28. So it's accomplishing the number 28 over 3 stages. And I wanted to find if this applies also to my mother's side, and I found it doesn't, because there are 26 years between my mother's mother and my mother. But then I found there's 27 years between my mother and me, and then there's 28 years. So my mother's side is counting up 26, 27, 28, concluding 28 in my generation the same as my father's side. So you can count backwards in time with that, and you can see how many generations, or potentially how many generations God has been working through my family. Because it might not be each generation, the next and the next. It could skip a couple, depending on what ancestors were actually working for God. So also, if you take the years of birth and you add up the individual numbers, then you get this pattern 18, 19, 20. And if you know from the principle, 3 stages, each stage representing the number 7, like 7 time periods. The top is 21, so we need to find 21 as well. And there are a couple of ways we can find that with my wife and I. So, for example, if you take our birth years, yeah, it's not as pretty, so sorry about that. It's all kind of different orders at the moment. Okay, so we can start with doing a bit of numerology. I read one quote from two parents where he described this, but also this applies to old languages like Hebrew and Sanskrit, and each letter has a numerical value. So, for example, in the ancient Hebrew, if you take the word for father and you add up the number equivalents of each of those letters, the word father equals 11. And if you take the word mother, it equals 33. And if you take father and mother, you get child. And the numerical equivalent of child is 44. So, these ancient languages, they have a numerical aspect and they all correlate as well in the same way that the words do. It's really amazing. So, we can see here also, these are the total numbers of mine and my wife's names, birth names. I was born in 82, and my wife was born in 83. So also, without the one, the number of my name is the same as my birth year, and it's the same for my wife. So that's really interesting. And if you get 82 and 83, I say the one represents God, because you don't get 21 if you add 182. So I just kind of figured that out, and that's the way I worked it. 8 plus 2 plus 8 plus 3 is 21. So that works for our names, and it also works for our birth year. So, the blessing, the purpose of the creation of God's providence is to harmonize a couple, to bring people together in the blessing. So it makes sense that we find the number 21 in my lineage when my wife and I harmonize, when our names harmonize and our birth years and everything. So, I wouldn't be able to find that as an individual. It doesn't work. So that's the end of that slide. That's much quicker than I thought, but if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask.
Does it work in any category you work the numbers at? Like between ages of your own mother and father?
Pardon me?
Or is it just your particular DNA that does? That matches the years so close to the sections of your big birthright and your wife's birthright?
I'm not sure. I don't understand the question.
I don't think I do either.
Okay.
You're saying would the numbers work in your name? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because your wife's worked with yours, kind of. I was wondering if it would work in the same category as mine and hers.
Okay, well, yeah, that would be something for you
Because
to
I was
research.
saying we've been together 23 years. I was telling you that.
Okay.
And you had a 23-year separation.
Yeah.
And maybe 23 could be. I heard a lot about that number 23 lately.
Yeah, that would be something for you to look at. If you can have a look at that yourself and see what you find.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot. Like my wife, for example, since I received the blessing with my wife, it seems now that these numbers focus a lot more on my wife's course than it does on my course. We're in the age of women now, especially, so it makes a lot of sense that although in our relationship, as the man is a subject, right, but then those positions can change harmoniously and so on, but there's also an element of providence. I don't think it's the leading element anymore in our lives because we're much more in establishing Chunalguk, right, heaven on earth. But there's still an element. Like my wife joined in 2002 and she received the blessing in 2009. So that's a 7-year period. So for her that's a 7-year individual course, right? So from when she joined until she received the blessing and she could become a couple and start her second 7-year course.
Because we've been to the first blessing, but we haven't been to the second blessing. We haven't?
Okay. I better get that quick.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so would we what can we do now? I've got some more content I can give, or so that's the end of that topic.
Now's a good time if maybe you want to ask if people want to talk about certain things, certain topic.
Okay.
We have a few people.
Okay. So yeah, if anyone has any questions about anything, would you like to suggest a topic?
Do you have any ketchup?
No.
The other question I have for you is, I've experienced many of the similar things that you were discussing yesterday, but I find the spirit world to be somewhat I'm going to say dangerous.
Okay.
You can't just willy-nilly go into the spirit world. If you do, there's gremlins there.
Right.
Big ones. And I came across some of this type of situation back in the 80s, so I did a prayer condition to shut down spiritually.
Okay.
And I had a lot of kids, and had to be right here, right now. But in retrospect, I don't know if I made the right decision. And I don't know if I should refocus on that type of direction.
Okay.
I've been out of my body, I've done all the things that, a lot of the things you were talking about.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's nice to meet you in your body. Yeah. When I was around 15 or 16, I actually prayed to God to close down unless it was good for him. Because I had read stories about people who were put in a mental asylum. They were given drugs or electric shock treatment because they were misdiagnosed with being schizophrenia or some other conditions when they were just spiritually open and no one really understood, and they had some crazy ideology that by which they couldn't understand spiritual experiences. So I wanted to avoid that. So when I was around 15 or 16, I said to God that unless it's good for you, then I don't want to experience the spirit world, I'm not interested. So from that age, it's always been centered on what's good for God. And, I would say I've been distracted sometimes. I've experimented in different ways, but it was part of my search to see what I was capable of doing. But my search was always focused on finding absolute truth, which I wanted to find since I was 12, and that focus was, I think that kept me safe, because I was very clear on what I was finding, what I was looking for. So I never really went too far beyond anything, but also, like my default state, now my general state is spiritually closed. So I don't get distracted when I go down the street, and I don't perceive people's spirits and stuff like that, which other people cannot stop happening. So by closing down, if you felt that was necessary for you, I think that was the right thing to do. There's always a safer option, right, to do that if a person, like if I wasn't sure I would be able to continue doing good things for God, making accomplishments, then I would be closed down completely. So that's always a better option, because we can achieve things based on the principle, based on our understanding. Don't need to be spiritually open to make good accomplishments. But I think I've also received a lot of spiritual protection from my ancestors and angels and things, that because I have a kind of purpose that this is focused on as well, that I need to testify about the spirit world to people, and also in a science-based manner where I can present clear explanations like about the biology of it as well, how our bodies affect our spirit, which I'll go into this evening about vitality elements. There was a quote, I read it in the Sun Moon Moon Quotes app, which you can get on your smartphone, and you can get a fresh quote every day on your app when you wake up in the morning. That's really awesome. And there's a quote on there that said we need to have our spirit and our intellect and a good balance. So as much as I have spiritual experience, I study. So I always try to do at least as much or more study than I have spiritual experience. And that way I know that I'm keeping a good balance. And it is dangerous, to go in the spirit world without being prepared or without having a clear purpose, because if you don't know your direction when you go there, you can get lost. Even on the earth, people who you interact with, maybe outside because they they're not aware of what they're doing so much as we are. They can get confused spiritually, so it manifests physically. Sorry. Yeah. I know, does that answer anything?
Yeah, I think we're in agreement on that.
Okay. Yeah, and generally I always recommend if someone's not sure, just close down. It's just safer. Yeah. I know what your parents say it's good to be spiritually open. You can experience the Providence, but that's what people like me are here for, to testify about it. If others can't, don't, or would prefer not to, for any reason, there's always a way to understand what's going on without being spiritually open. That's also another topic I'll be going into, as how to perceive spiritual influences without being spiritually open. There's some things you can recognize that goes on around you, which, let me see, I could do that today actually, because that's not on the schedule for tomorrow. It is on the schedule a little bit, but I could go into that if you want. Okay, so like in the principle it says that spiritual phenomena manifests physically as well, through the body. So if you have spiritual experience, you can feel it physically in your body. One example I like giving about this is the placebo effect. When new medications are produced, they need to be tested against the placebo, right? So people think a placebo is imaginary and it's not real, but placebo actually generates physiological effects, and that's why it's tested. New medication is tested against it, and 70% of the time, the medication loses against the placebo. So that's how effective placebo is compared to medication. And there's a lot of science behind this, which I'll go into also about the vitality elements. But generally, when you have an emotion, your brain, the hypothalamus gland in your brain, it's like a heartbeat in your brain, and it pumps out chemicals which are called peptides. And these are small proteins, and they're made of 21 different amino acids. And those 21 amino acids can be arranged in different sequences. And because they can be arranged in different sequences, like in a different order, then they have a different effect on your body. So basically there's an almost unlimited combination of these, and each one is related to your emotion, and these are classified as chemical emotions. So these peptides, they're basically two kinds if you're going to categorize them. One is life-giving and one is life-taking. So one promotes well-being in your body and the other detracts well-being. It takes it away from your body, causes illness and that type of thing. And this is the biological phenomena behind negative people being unhealthy and positive people generally being healthy, because those happy emotions generate those chemicals which have that effect. So then these peptides go from your brain into your bloodstream, and they go to every cell of your body, and every cell has a receptor for this particular protein. And it's like a spiral shape, and the protein is like a spiral, and it goes in and locks in like a key. And when the information in that peptide, in this protein, it goes in the cell, it changes the molecular state of the cell, and it changes what goes on inside the cell, which is really complex. So many things happen inside. I don't know all the details of inside the cell, but it's like, you can watch videos on YouTube and it's just really incredible. So this has a physiological effect, and it also affects your DNA through a process called epigenetics. So epigenetics is the system of control over your genes, right, that affect how your genes function. So a lot of people think that you have your genes, and that determines your physical destiny, or maybe even your character, but actually the expression of those genes can change according to your lifestyle, your diet, and also the influences you receive through your genetic heritage, from your, even over generations, from your grandparents and their grandparents. And this is scientifically proven. You can check online about this. And this is really an interesting area of science. So the epigenome, epi means above or beyond. So it's a system of on and off switches for your genes. And that's what determines how your genes are expressed, right? If you have a gene for hair color, if the gene expresses red hair, if that gene is turned on, then you have red hair. If it's turned off, you don't have red hair. And then another gene which controls another color might be turned on, you have that color instead. But if it's turned on, you also have a volume switch for the expression. So if it's turned on, you have red hair, then it could be turned all the way up, so then you have really red hair. But if the volume is not turned up so much, then you have slightly red hair. So each gene has that on and off switch and a volume switch. So it's really interesting, and those switches are activated by different chemicals that go into your cell. We receive these chemicals from the food we eat, what we drink, the air we breathe as well, so pollutants have an effect, even natural chemicals like oxygen and other elements from the air. And if you go in a forest, for example, it's very healthy. And also the epigenetic instructions that you receive from your ancestry, right? Because you inherit their traits too. You inherit the genes of your ancestors and also epigenetic traits. And these effects can be turned on and off within a generation. You know, that's the amazing thing. They can be activated and deactivated within your own lifetime. So, like myself, I'm doing research into mitochondrial DNA because it's connected to the lineage. But I actually discovered that based on a revelation I had. When I was studying the lineage, I was studying principle in science and praying a lot. And then I had a dream. In the dream, it said, transcend HVR1. And then I woke up thinking, yeah, I know what transcend means, but HVR1, I'm like, what's that? I had no idea what this means. It's just letters and a number. So I looked up on Google, HVR1, and it turns out to be a section of the mitochondrial DNA. And so then I researched mitochondrial DNA, and I found out that's what people trace their ancestors with, their physical heritage. So then I know instantly this is obviously related to your lineage. And this goes into the original lineage, because I want to prove how the blessing removes the original sin from the lineage. Right? So that's where I'm going with that. But this, this epigenetic markers, that's what they call the epigenetic instructions that you get from your environment. They also come from their parents based on their relationships. And that's what I think one part of the original sin is an epigenetic effect on our genes that prevents us from the DNA functioning according to its original design, and which was inherited based on Adam and Eve's fallen sexual relationship. It says in the principle that the only way something can be inherited is by being passed down through the lineage. Like you can't get that from eating a fruit. And also in other quotes, I took pictures on my phone which I can check. I think it's from the new Champu Mogyon, where I found a quote. It's the only quote I found from two parents where they specifically used the word genetics in relation to the lineage. And I felt like that was gold, because I never had those two words in the same sentence before. So anyway, I'll find out for tomorrow. But yeah, there are a few key areas of research that I would recommend studying if you want to find out more about this as well. Is epigenetics, more than genetics, and another phenomena called microchimerism. Chimerism is like vampirism. It means when someone is kind of, like vampires suck the blood and they kind of take away things, like at least in the movies, right? Like some bats do that as well, vampire bats, I think, or mosquitoes, whatever. But so microchimerism is a phenomena whereby a woman, through sexual intercourse, receives the man's Y chromosome through the sperm, and it stays inside her body. it stays alive and functioning within her bloodstream, even in her brain. And it stays with her. And so the more that she has a sexual relationship with, well, let's say different men in the fallen world, then she has multiple men's Y chromosomes in her, circulating throughout her entire body. And I think that causes a confusion for the woman. So I think it's well documented that women who have multiple sexual partners also have a lot of emotional problems, more than women who have a stable relationship with one man, right? And part of the science behind that would be biophotonics. This is another area of science. Bio means biology, and photonics means photons, so it's particles of light. And the DNA actually produces light, actually produces biological photons.
So to be reflected in the aura.
Yeah, in your aura. Well, I think your aura is your electromagnetic field, the bioelectromagnetic field produced by your cells. Because each cell acts like an electromagnet, and so it has a particular shape and strength. And so then an organ, which is composed of multiple cells, also has its own bioelectromagnetic fields, which is all of the cells together. And then the body is the one of all the cells and the organs in the body together. But it's very interesting phenomena that the brain has a strong magnetic field, and it actually extends outside of the skull. That's why they can use these electro sensors to sense your brainwaves by just putting a cap on your skull, on your head. But your heart has a field. I think it's something stupidly large, like 100,000 times or something really big, stronger than your brain. So the heart's electromagnetic field is so much bigger, and it extends outside of your body by 7 to 8 feet, whereas your brain is only a couple of feet. And it makes more sense because the heart is actually a muscle which pumps all the time, so it's very strong, and it's continuously pumping, so it generates a really strong magnetic field. And it forms a torus shape, like a donut shape, around your body in a horizontal fashion. And there are research organizations that have studied this, and they can show these results and things. I think they're also documented on a website called pubmed.org. PubMed is considered like the top peer-review scientific journal website in the world. It's where anyone who has any scientific theory or research, they put it on the website, so other scientists around the world can test the theory as well, and then it's like an open source thing where it can be tested and validated by other groups of scientists. So that's what I think the aura is. Basically, it's just the electromagnetic field, but the biophotons are something more fundamental, because the universe itself is composed of electromagnetic waves as well, and these are produced in our body, right? Photons are electromagnetic waves as well. So there are multiple articles that state the most likely source of them is the DNA, and there have been some reports in the website where it's been observed coming from there, like not a lot, but it's been observed. So, like I described from the process we have based on our emotions, with the peptides that come out of the brain, they go into the bloodstream, go into every cell, and affects the state of your DNA through the epigenetic process. We affect the state of our DNA, which affects the biophotons which are being released from our DNA. And so those biophotons would contain information based on the state of the DNA, right? Because light is the most effective carrier of information in the universe, right? It's the most effective thing which we can use to transmit information. And so this is also, it relates to the phrases, God is love, God is truth, and also, like I gave the picture of God as being a ball of light, and many other spiritual people have described God as being a ball of light. So God is like the ultimate photon. He's like the original photon, right? God's truth and God's word is contained within God's love, right? And that also takes the shape of a photon in a way, right? Because light conveys information. So I believe the reason that God created light first, like I said in the Bible, God created light, was so that he could convey that information in the process of creating the universe, right? Because like with the computer, in order to see things on the screen, images and whatever happens, you need to make the code for it. And so the Word of God is like the code for the universe. Like I said in principle, God's Word has a numerical aspect, so I think it's an alphanumeric code as well. So yeah, that's a very foundational level of the creation. It's based on the code first to create the structure of the universe in which people can live and exist. So we have control over photons, over the structure of the universe, based on our emotions, through this whole thing I was describing. So when Jesus turns water into wine and all this cool stuff, he's actually engaging in this process to have dominion over the creation, right? In the principle it says the internal dominion of the heart, right? Through loving the creation. And when we really love that creation, we have these emotions and we have this flow of energy with this, creating the biophotons that reflect the state of your DNA based on your emotions of love. Then the universe will respond, right? Because it is other organisms, anything with DNA, and also everything else is composed of the same stuff. It receives the information too. It responds to that. So that's also how we can learn about the creation, through loving it. Like True Father says in his autobiography, if you love something, you can understand everything about it. Because there's information in everything that you can just learn about it just by connecting with it, based on that level of love. But also if you understand it in the context of the flow of information, right? God's word, God's principle, and truth, which is contained in everything inside those electromagnetic waves. Yeah, so I did some healing on my boiler one time when I lived in a flat by myself, and I decided to do some healing on my boiler because it wasn't working. So I got my hands and everything, just almost touching. And I would imagine God's love coming down vertically in a pillar of golden light and filling my abdomen area. And then when I felt full of energy, and I imagined it coming out of my hands. So I did this on my boiler, and after about a minute, the electrical box, the circuit, exploded. I was renting it, right? So I had to call the landlord.
And it was healed magically by the landlord.
Yeah, they got an electrician to fix it. So he opened it, right? And I was there with him, so I wanted to see inside. And I was like, "What's wrong?" And he said, "It's all fused." Like, what happened? I'm like, "I don't know."
Do you still do that? You still do spiritual healing?
Yeah, I do it on myself and my wife. I think that's recommendable.
But not on other people?
No, because there's an element of responsibility which people need to take, and yeah. So that's also why I don't do spiritual readings for people anymore, because also there's a potential there for them to get attached, and also I don't want to receive people's negative spirits, which they need to clear up themselves. That's why one reason why I wanted to provide education more than some kind of spiritual demonstration, because I believe this education, it helped me so much. That's really the foundation of my my development, and so I hope by sharing this that I can help others as well develop. So that's one thing I also wanted to mention about people's capacity as well, about fulfilling 100%. Each person's 100% is at a different level, right? So one person might have a higher capacity for art or for riding a bike, like doing some kind of tricks or whatever, and someone else might try their whole life and be really rubbish at it, but then they have a higher capacity for something else, right? Which this person doesn't have. And also our capacity to love is also different. So we shouldn't compare ourselves with other people or anything. This is one thing I learned from One Wado. In One Wado, the teacher, Master Han, he said, compare yourself only with yourself from yesterday, today and tomorrow. That's really valuable advice, which it really helped me a lot. So I think it's mostly about understanding your own potential and capacity to love. And even if loving a single flower is your ultimate capacity, if you love a flower with 100%, that's you've fulfilled your potential, right? So I think I've finished the chat. If there's anything else anyone wants to talk about, I can keep going, but that was the end of that kind of, spirit, or whatever you want to call it. So I'm just going to get a drink, but if anyone wants to ask anything, I have pictures as well I could show, if you just want me to talk about stuff. Okay, so it's 5 o'clock. What time did you say? You said it's 6
So I have dinner at 6.
And there's a lot I can talk about, and also a lot I will be talking about tomorrow as well. So there's a lot of some things I mentioned today I'll also explain tomorrow, but I think it's good to repeat them, because especially some of the science parts, it can be quite it's quite intricate, some of it, and it's good to hear it more than once. Also, I wanted to say that if I use simple words or I repeat myself, it's not because some people think I think they can't understand or whatever. Sometimes people get offended by it sometimes, but because also I want to make it as simple as possible, so as many people as possible can understand. But also we're recording it, so it's going online, so people who don't speak English as their first language, so they can understand it as well. So I just wanted to mention that, because I get upset sometimes when people think I think they're stupid. It's nothing like that. It's just I just don't want any misunderstanding about stuff like that. So I could show some general pictures. Okay, so let me see. Okay, I can show you, this is my picture of my science organization. I've got a YouTube channel as well with my wife. If you just type James and Ilona Powell into Google, then loads of stuff comes up, and one of them is our YouTube channel. So this was a part of a revelation which I had on the last day of a 7-day fast, which I offered for my blessing. My wife has offered 9 or 10 7-day fasts. She's really amazing. I can't imagine doing that. Before I did my first 7-day fast, I made a plan to do more, once a month or something. And after 7 days, no thanks. I'm not going to do that again for at least for a while. So, when I did the fast, I did 21 days breakfast fast before. So actually my stomach was prepared, and the 7-day fast was really quite easy for me. But then the next 7 days, when I was allowed to eat, but the center leaders where I was were telling me, you can't eat, that was really terrible for me, because I got angry and everything. So it was really a big challenge for me. So yeah, this was on the 7th day, and it really came in just a moment, like a flash, and I had the name STARS as the name of this group, and ever since I was a child I wanted to create a science group to research spiritual things, and I've always been trying to find some kind of cool anagram for the name, right? So in this revelation it said STARS, which means sincerity and truth for the advancement of revolutionary science. And I almost didn't write it down because when I joined, my pastor told me to not do any spiritual things and instead get a good grip on the principle. So I focused on that. So when I had this, I almost ignored it, but then I felt it was too important to lose it. So yeah, the purple colour on the outside, later I read that True Father said purple is the most beautiful colour in the spirit world because it contains every colour. And also the master belt in one order is purple, it's not black. And the blue is earth, red is heaven, green is like nature or natural things, it's kind of a combination of blue and red. And the stars, there are actually 5 stars on each corner, so there's 4 corners, and there's the central light in the middle, so that means 21, and the central point is God. And that's actually moving around, it's rotating and stuff, you know, so it's not just a static thing. Oh yeah, also when I made that, I went to Champion, I think this was in 2010, and I met a brother in Champion, and so I met him there, and I went there fundraising also with an Albanian team. I wasn't fundraising in Champion, but in Korea. So I went to the original palace 3 times with this team, and the first 2 times the team leader told us to sit behind a pillar and at the back, and I was like upset because I want to sit near the front by True Parents, but he told us no, we have to sit at the back. And I was upset, but I sat at the back. The 3rd time he told us we could go and sit anywhere we want. So I wanted to go sit near True Parents right at the front, like literally on their feet. But when I was walking towards the front, I saw a brother sitting on the left, and there was a space there, and somehow I couldn't walk past him. Right? I felt like I wanted to sit at the front, especially because the previous 2 times, I didn't get that chance. But then I kept looking at him, and I felt I have to go by him. So I sat next to him, and I was really praying, like, why did I do that? So I just had the inspiration to ask him about science. I said, excuse me, do you like science? And he said, yeah. So he started talking about science. That was Dominic. And actually, recently before we met, he had written 3 purposes of science organization. Which the first one was to prove through science that God exists. Second is to find the actual connection between the spirit world and physical world. And I added the point to use it to develop technology. And the 3rd point is to revolutionize our current scientific world viewpoint. So we combined his 3 purposes with my logo and the name, and we formed our group. And we performed our first science experiment in Champong. I think it was the same day. He asked me how would a camera, which is not sensitive to the spirit world, take pictures of angels and spirits, like those orbs that you can see.
That's what the question I
That was the one, yeah?
That was the one.
Cool. So he wanted to ask a question. So, cool. So I actually see these orbs myself, so I do know that they are a spiritual thing. And I see them very substantially. And even when I did one time, before I did one I had a bag of, in the UK called chips, right, like fries, the thick ones. It was around 10 minutes before, so my stomach was full up and I was sweating from it. And then I went to one and I really had to push myself to do one because my body was weighed down with the food. And I felt like I shouldn't have done that, but by really pushing myself beyond my physical body, it opened up my spiritual senses, and I was like totally immersed in like hundreds and thousands or millions of orbs all around me in different sizes and all moving in different directions. Then I was doing the form 4 of One-Wado, which is considered the most spiritual form, because apparently it reflects the emotions of the spirit world more than the rest of the forms. So there's this particular motion, when you come like that, and as I did this motion, a spirit was doing exactly the same motion as an orb. It was perfectly in sync. So that was really cool. And then my teacher asked me, like, what am I doing? Because it must have looked strange what I was doing. But when I looked at him, actually he looked like a body of light. I could just see him as white light, and the other students in the room were all white light. But I could also see all the orbs. So, like, I could tell the difference between what was physical and spiritual, but it all looked like white light. And he asked me, like, "Are you okay, James?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm okay. I'm the master." And he said, "No, you're not." But, like, in that state, I felt like being one with the creation, with that, is, in a way, it's like being a master. But then there's that danger of really taking yourself too seriously and stepping over the edge. In that moment, even though I felt I had that connection, then I felt I had to ignore myself. I had to ignore my ego, really. But there's a risk, of taking that too far and just saying, "Yeah, well, I'm the master. Look, I had this experience, and I can see your light and stuff." So there's a risk of being spiritually open for that reason. But I was able to accept his dominion as my teacher, and he told me, "No, you're not the master." And then I thought physically, actually, and in terms of subject, object, spiritually, and all this kind of stuff. Even though I had the spiritual things, whatever, he's my teacher, and I'm in his class, so I have to obey. So that's where, like, the understanding of principle comes in to our spiritual development. It helps us keep us on track, and so the growing period is about accomplishments based on the principle, right? It's not based on some experience or something. It's based on what we do according to the principle. And that's actually really another interesting point. So it means the principal period is a realm of intellect. It's where the intellect guides the heart, right? So it's subject partner over your emotions. And a lot of people think actually we should live based on our emotions, but that comes after you've entered the realm of heart in the completion stage. Sorry, the question. What was the question? Yeah?
Oh, you reminded me, you talked about it, but I was wondering about those orbs that sometimes you see in photos.
Okay, cool. All right, yeah, I've got pictures there. Can just remind me in a minute? Can you?
Yeah, that's
okay,
fine.
Thanks. So actually in your brain as well, you've got the intellect region of your brain, and the emotional part of your brain. I think the prefrontal cortex in the front of your brain is related to your ability to reason, so to ration and logically consider things. I think that your emotional center matures before your intellectual center in your brain. So when children are entering teenage years, right, they have all these emotions based on hormones as well, and they're really strong emotions. But you need your intellect to guide your heart to maturity. So that's why we really need to focus on understanding principle, and so that also physically, when our brain and our emotions are maturing at a young age, we need to make sure they mature centered on the principle, because then you form the habits of thinking centered on principle, and so when you have reached that level of maturity, you have these habits already formed in your brain, and these are part of neuroplasticity. I don't know if you know about neuroplasticity, but this is the ability of the brain for the neural connections in your brain to change. Right? A lot of people thought that the brain is fixed, but actually, like scientists are finding about most things now, everything is dynamic and it changes around. So, also when a person has a brain, what's the word? Begins with T, traumatic injury, trauma. Yeah, when someone has a trauma to the brain, maybe they had a car accident and they lost a quarter of their brain or something. Actually, then their brain rewires itself and it compensates on the other areas, so they can still perform the same functions, even without that part of the brain, because the brain is very dynamic. But as we get older, then our brain doesn't do that so much. Well, at least that's the way it has been in the fallen world, because people haven't developed a mind which can continue to change when they get older. Like True Father said in this quote I gave at the beginning of the slide, always research and question, and like that. So we always need to develop that mind, the ability to do that. So, when as a person gets older and they do the same thing day in and day out, and they have a routine, and it basically means they think the same things every day because they're doing the same things. So if they do that after so many years, then those neurons in the brain are being activated in the same way for so many years, and they actually get thicker and stronger because you're repeating that action, those thoughts. So then those thicker and stronger neurons become very difficult to change. They can be changed, but it will take a lot more effort when they get stronger. So this kind of goes into a reason like why do my parents still fight, for example, or why do I have problems with my relationship, is that if a person has been thinking in a certain way for so many years, and it's difficult for them to change their mind, or literally the structure of their brain. So they're stuck in this way of thinking, based on what their brain is able to do. So in order to change their habits, they need to change their thinking. Because the habits are based on the neural connections, which in a way allows them to have those thoughts more easily. Right? That's what. Yeah?
Could you give an example of that? That might make it a little bit more clear.
Example. Like when people say about second nature, it's like, oh, why do you behave like that? It's my second nature. Or they do certain training until it becomes second nature. What that means is it becomes a habit of the body. So I'll give another example of miniature brains in the body. They're called ganglions. And a ganglion is a small cluster of nerves. So it's like a really tiny brain. It's got a certain number of nerves, or neurons. And you find them located at various points throughout your body, in your muscles. And they have pre-programmed responses in them. And so these are like safety mechanisms, so it's a built-in safety system. So if you put your hand on a hot stove, then your arm moves it away without you thinking or without you telling it to move. And that's because these little little pockets of nerves located throughout your body, has that instruction. If this is too hot for my hand, then it will move without you even realizing it. So when a person does martial arts training, or any kind of sports training, or even cooking at home and these kind of things, my wife is a pro at cooking. She's been doing this for so many years. She was raised with that in her family as well. It's amazing to watch her cook. And she doesn't think about it. She's trained so much that she can do it as second nature.